I greet you all to the Manifested e-learning platform. Today we are going to study a topic known as peer review mechanism. The subject is governance and compliance audit. The topic is peer review mechanism. This topic has 5 subtopics. First, scope and types of peer review. 2, responsibilities of parties in a peer review. 3, peer review mechanism stages. 4, quality management and assurance measures. 5, confidentiality requirements. We will be taking a subtopic one at a time. Today we begin with the purpose, scope, and types of peer review. Those are 3 things. 1 is purpose, then scope and types of peer review. But first of all, what is a peer review? Now, peer review in the context of governance and compliance audits refers to the systematic and independent evaluation of an audit firm's or internal audit functions quality control system and its adherence to professional standards in conducting governance and compliance engagements. That is to mean that the governance and compliance auditor is required to adhere to professional standards and to adhere or to put in place quality control systems. In conducting audits, the auditor has to adhere to certain professional standards, and therefore peer review refers to the process of systematically and independently evaluating an audit firm's adherence to such professional standards, where an independent person evaluates a governance and compliance auditor as to whether the auditor is adhering to professional standards or quality control systems. That's what we are calling peer review. It is essentially auditing the auditors to ensure they are performing their work competently and ethically. Auditing the auditors is what we refer to as peer review. So what is the purpose of auditing the auditors? That's one question to answer. Purpose. An auditor, I repeat, is required to adhere to certain professional standards while carrying out governance and compliance audits. And it's important to evaluate whether the auditor has complied, whether the auditor has adhered to professional standards in conducting governance and compliance audits. So, what is the purpose of such peer reviews? 1 is to enhance audit quality. 1, enhance audit. To enhance audit quality. The fundamental goal of peer reviews in the context of governance and compliance auditing is to ensure that governance and compliance audits are conducted in accordance with established professional standards, ethical guidelines, and relevant regulatory requirements. Audits are not conducted anyhow. No. There is a framework which the auditor has to follow in carrying out. That's why we have independent persons who come in to find out or to evaluate the auditor's work to ensure that the auditors are adhering to these ethical standards, professional standards, and regulatory framework. Enhancing audit quality is the primary purpose. Now, the second purpose of peer review is promoting consistency and best practice, is to promote consistency and best practice. And how does peer reviews promote consistency and best practice? Peer reviews identify areas where an audit firm or internal audit function can improve its methodologies, documentation, and reporting, and that facilitates the sharing of best practices across the profession. That is how peer review promotes consistency and best practice. The third purpose of peer review is maintaining public trust and credibility. Maintain public is to maintain public trust and credibility. Is to maintain public trust and credibility. By subjecting audit practices to external scrutiny, peer review assures stakeholders like the board, like the management and regulators, that the audit function is operating within integrity, objectivity, and competence, and that builds confidence in the governance and compliance reports that are issued by the auditors. That's how peer review helps to maintain public trust and credibility. Now, the fourth purpose is identifying areas for improvement, is to identify areas for improvement. To identify areas for improvement. Peer reviews provide constructive feedback and recommendations for strengthening internal control systems, internal quality control systems, methodologies, and also training programs, and this fosters what we call continuous improvement within the audit practice. The fourth purpose of auditing auditors is to ensure compliance with professional standards. To ensure compliance with professional standards. Is to ensure compliance with professional standards. Candidates auditors are people. These are human beings, and as much as they are auditing companies, they also need to be checked if they are complying with professional standards, because in conducting governance and compliance audits, they are required to comply with ethical standards, regulatory requirements, and so on. So many professional bodies issue standards for governance audits. All right? Many. They issue these audits. I mean, they issue standards which mandate peer reviews for firms or internal audit functions conducting audits under their standards. And that ensures adherence to the professional requirements. So peer reviews help to ensure compliance with professional standards. Peer reviews can also be used to mitigate risks for the audit firm. Mitigate risks for the audit firm. Peer reviews can mitigate risks for the audit firm. And how does that happen? Now, by proactively identifying and addressing weaknesses in audit processes, peer review helps audit firms and reduce their exposure to litigation, exposure to regulatory penalties, and also reputational damage. The seventh purpose is in relation to Professional development. Professional development. Peer reviews provide an opportunity for the reviewing peers to learn from the practices of others and for the reviewed entity to gain insights for professional growth. Professional development is a purpose of peer review. So these are 7 purposes. Let's now move to discuss the scope. What is the scope of peer review? Scope. What is the scope of peer review? Now, this is peer review candidates in governance and compliance audit. We are discussing peer review in the context of governance and compliance audit. So the question now is, what is the scope? Now, the scope of peer review for governance and compliance audits typically encompasses an assessment of the audit firm or internal audit functions entire system of quality control and this application to individual engagements, which may include review of quality control system design, review of quality control system design. Review of quality control system design. This means evaluating whether the firm or the audit firm has clearly defined leadership responsibilities for quality within its governance and compliance audit practice. So it may include leadership and responsibilities. Reviewing of quality control system design may include 1. Leadership and responsibilities. Leadership and responsibilities. It may also include ethical requirements. Review of quality control system may include ethical requirements. That means assessing policies and procedures related to independence, objectivity, and also integrity of the personnel involved in governance and compliance audits. So we have these personnel who are engaged in the audit team. When carrying out peer review, the focus is on the independence, the objectivity, the integrity of the ethical team. Have they met these ethical requirements, ethical issues, things to do with integrity, objectivity, independence, and so on, for the personnel involved in the audit. Because remember, here we are discussing peer review, which you've said it is the audit of the auditors. So as much as the auditor examines the audit company in relation to these ethical requirements, the auditor again is also required to adhere to certain ethical standards. And when carrying out a peer review, that is also part of the scope, ethical requirements. Understand? Yes. Then you also have acceptance and continuance. Acceptance and continuation or continuance of the engagement, of the client relationship, That is also part of the scope. Acceptance and continuance of the client relationship. That means reviewing the process for deciding whether to accept or continue governance and compliance audit engagements, including consideration of client integrity and the firm's competency. That is review of quality control system design. There may also be the human resources. Human resources is also part of the scope under quality control system design. All right. That means examining policies for recruitment, for professional development, for performance evaluation, and also assignment of personnel with appropriate competence and capabilities for governance and compliance audits. The governance and compliance audit firm is required to have competent auditors. Now, when auditing the governance and compliance auditors, this review focuses on whether the audit firm has policies for recruitment, has policies for professional development, has policies for performance evaluation. Does the audit firm evaluate the performance of its workers? And does it assign responsibilities appropriately? Those are questions that are covered or is part of the scope when carrying out this review. We may also have engagement performance. Engagement performance. Engagement performance. That means evaluating policies and procedures for planning, executing, supervising, reviewing, and also documenting governance and compliance audit engagements, including adherence to the relevant audit standards. And these standards could be the IIA standards for internal audits and so on. And this would cover areas like understanding of the entity's governance framework and compliance obligations. It may include risk assessment procedures for compliance risks, also sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence that is gathered, and also documentation of audit work and findings. It can go on also to include the formulation of audit conclusions and responsibilities, and also reporting practices. The audit reports. Are the reports clear? Are the reports accurate? Are the reports complete? So that is the engagement performance. That is the execution. How did the auditor carry out the entire audit engagement? How did the auditor perform? There has to be policies and procedures for, first of all, planning. It begins with planning. Then after planning, there is the execution phase. Does the auditor carry out vision? That has to be checked while auditing the governance and compliance auditors. Of course, then there is monitoring. Monitoring is part of the scope of peer review. Monitoring means assessing the effectiveness of the audit firm's internal monitoring processes to ensure that its quality control system is operating effectively. So that's the first scope. Review of quality control system design. Then the second part is review of selected engagements. Review of selected engagements. Review of selected engagements. Review of selected engagements. Have the walkthroughs and also detailed reviews. The peer reviewer will select a sample of completed governance and compliance audit engagements. And for these selected audit engagements, the reviewer will examine the audit documentation and reports to determine if the work was performed and reported in accordance with professional standards and the firm's own quality control policies. And that may include assessing whether the scope of the engagement was appropriate, or whether sufficient evidence was obtained to support the conclusions, or whether findings were adequately supported and reported, and so on. So that is part of the scope. Review of selected engagement. The auditor selects an engagement that governance and audit engagement, and then it checks all the aspects that I've mentioned to ensure that the audit is carried out professionally. 3, we have interviews as part of the scope of peer review. That means interviewing the key audit personnel like the partners, the managers, and the staff in order to assess their understanding of and adherence to the firm's quality control policies and professional standards. If you are to audit the auditor, then you also just carry out interviews. The way the auditor carries out interviews while gathering audit evidence from the client. Because you are auditing the auditor, interviews must also be part of it. Carrying out interviews with the audit staff, with the partners, with the audit key personnel to assess their understanding and their adherence to the firm's quality control policies. Interviewing management also may be part of the peer review process. That is interviewing management or the audit committee of the client organization. So the interview here is not just limited to the auditor, but also interviewing the audit committee members, the management, the top level management, just to get feedback for the quality of the audit services received. Interviews is part of the scope of the work of the peer reviewer. Then there is review of other relevant documentation. Review of other relevant review of other relevant documentation. Other relevant documentation. Review of other relevant documentation, like training records of audit personnel, like independence confirmations, like the firm's methodologies or templates or checklists for governance and compliance audit. The auditor, the one who reviews, the auditor should also check other relevant documentation. So that's it, candidates. These 4 areas are what are covered in peer review work. So that is all for the scope. Let's now analyze the types of peer review. Types. What are the types? Types of peer review. Now, the specific terminology for peer reviews can vary slightly depending on the professional body or jurisdiction, but they fall into around 4 categories. The types we may have, for example, the system review. The first type is systems review. Systems review of the system. Most common for audit firms. Okay. The purpose of system review is to provide reasonable assurance that the firm's system of quality control, the audit firm system of control, quality control for its accounting and auditing practice is suitably designed and operating effectively to provide the firm with reasonable assurance of performing and reporting in conformity with applicable professional standards in all material respects. That is the purpose of systems review. And the scope can be broad, covering the entire quality control system. And it's typically applied to firms that perform audits, that perform examinations, or reviews under generally accepted generally accepted auditing standards. It could also be just attestation engagements. You understand? So the scope can be very wide. And system review involves reviewing policies, interviewing personnel, and also examining sample of engagements to see if the quality control system is followed and it is effective. That's the first type of peer review. Number two, we have engagement review. Engagement review, engagement review, engagement reviews. The purpose for engagement reviews is to determine whether specific engagements selected for review are performed and reported on in conformity with the professional standards in all material respects. And here, engagement review, the scope is narrower compared to systems review because it focuses only on the selected engagement files rather than the entire quality control system. And it provides no opinion on the firm's overall quality control system. It just determines whether specific engagements selected for review are performed and reported in conformity with applicable professional standards. What of the methodology? What's the methodology used in engagement review? Now, engagement review involves reviewing the documentation and reports for a sample of engagements, and it's often used for firms that perform only the compilation. The firms that only they do compilation or review engagement basically are lower assurance, or sometimes as a component of a larger system review. You understand? The methodology this is just taking a sample of engagement that provide lower assurance services. Number three, there is internal quality assessments. Did I get it right? Yes. Internal quality assessments, or what we call self-assessments with independent validation. These ones are often conducted by internal audit functions, all right? And the goal is to monitor the internal audit activity adherence to the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing standards and the code of ethics. That is the purpose. It's conducted by internal audit function. That is very important to note. The goal is to monitor. The goal of internal quality assessment, you see here the word internal quality. It is first of all conducted by the internal audit function. And the purpose or the goal is to monitor the internal audit activities adherence. So this review is conducted by the internal audit functions. It assesses the internal audit department's adherence to the standards across all aspects of its operations, including governance and compliance audit it performs. That's why it's sometimes known as self-assessment with independent validation. The fourth type of peer review is specialized reviews. Specialized review. Specialized review. Now, some industries or regulatory bodies might have specific peer review requirements tailored to their unique governance and compliance frameworks. For example, we may have reviews for firms auditing public companies, or specific reviews for government audit organizations. So that's what we call specialized review. It may be tailored for just public the government audit organizations. So these are four key types of peer review. Over today's lesson, the objective was to analyze the purpose of peer review, the scope of peer review, and the types of peer review. So we've identified 7 objectives of peer review. One is to enhance audit quality. But first of all, we defined peer review as the process of auditing the auditors. Peer review. The auditor audit another auditor. It is in the context of governance and compliance audit, we've said it refers to the systematic and independent evaluation of the audit firms or internal audit functions, quality control system, and its adherence to professional standards in conducting governance and compliance audits engagements. So the purpose, one, is to enhance audit quality. Number two is to promote consistency and best practice. Number three is to maintain public trust and credibility. Number four is to identify areas for improvement. Five is to ensure compliance with professional standards. And number six, to mitigate risks for the audit firm and also professional development. Then we've identified the scope of peer review. One is reviewing of quality control system design, is reviewing of selected engagement. Number four, number five, reviewing of other relevant documentation. Lastly, we've identified or analyzed 4 types of peer review. One is systems review. Number two, engagement review. Number three, internal quality. Then specialized reviews. Now, in closing, candidates, it's important to remember that peer review is a vital quality assurance mechanism in governance and compliance auditing. It ensures that those responsible for assessing an organization's adherence to rules and practices are themselves adhering to the highest level of professional standards, thereby safeguarding the integrity and the value of the audit process. Peer review is a process of auditing the auditors. That's all. God bless you. Bye-bye.